So most of this I'm going to have it loosely based. I've got a couple things that I want to hit on. Really trying to think of 4 years ago, what's a speech that I would have wanted to hear? What are the kind of what are sort of kind of a best hits compilation of all my favorite mistakes over the last 4 years? A couple moments of success, and then a lot of things that I learned the hard way that I could have learned a lot cheaper and a lot easier. I do want to make this relatively conversational as well. I know it's a bit tricky with a huge group. We're going to have some Q&A at the end. But if there are some questions, we might be able to kind of pepper some of them in. But as far as, as Abby mentioned, I am a non-technical founder, sole founder at that, which is occasionally in certain circles, hushed about like an obscenity. And I think that, I think there's a lot of great ideas from non-technical people. Obviously, technical is great. It's an important skill to have. But I feel like, my people, these kind of non-technical founders, are occasionally sort of written off. They're like, oh, nice idea, kid. What are you going to do? You're some guy with a PowerPoint. And some of you have heard that one. Okay. And I think there's a lot of great ideas, and you don't have to know, exactly how all the code happens. There's a much larger segment of the population that is, bright, that is entrepreneurial, that is paying attention to what they see every day, that understands what they want to see in the world, that doesn't happen to know how to code than those that do. But at an early stage, if you're a software company, software helps. But I feel like it's that there's this stage, the first, how do you get started as that non-technical founder? What do you start to do that makes everything else potentially possible? And I feel like this is where I got stuck the most. This is where a lot of people get stuck and say, all right, screw it, I'm going to be an actuary or whatever they end up doing, once they spend, 3 months touring the entrepreneurial lifestyle. Most of what I've learned to do is, especially at that early stage, is, it starts to get kind of pretty well tied to what I think it's about kind of building the instincts and trusting it, but then doing a lot of hard, awkward things that you wouldn't do otherwise. So, really putting yourself in direct confrontation with your idea, with your potential of success, and being really brutally truthful with yourself, and waking up every morning. It takes a lot to kind of have that founder perspective and saying, what am I absolutely wrong about? And what do I like that I'm wrong about? But really kind of this stage here. So you have an idea, what do I do about it? And I was there myself, and I hear from a lot of people like, I've got this great idea, I've got this amazing idea. All you need to do is sign my NDA and I'll tell you about it. But now all I need to do is get somebody to build it. Just get somebody to build it. And kind of the technical folks always kind of scoff at the idea of it's just, the commodity of getting somebody to build it. But first stage, I have an idea, I have a PowerPoint, I need to get somebody to build it. I need a technical founder. I need to try to get investors. I need to start applying to accelerators, even more now than ever before. It's like idea, accelerator, right now. Hire an agency to build your big vision. This is my personal favorite. This is one of my all-stars. When I started my company, so this past company, I've done a handful of other startups. This one, I started, cashed in all of my money, my 401k, and paid a bunch of contractors to build an app that I pretty much threw away about 6 months later. I also did that, quit my job to do it, and because I like doubling down, I actually launched the company the same month my son was born. So, hey, everything all at once. PR strategies to shake the world when you launch. Your idea is so mammoth and great and amazing that I want to make sure that A, nobody ever hears my idea before I'm ready to launch it, and B, I can sort of start this, whisper in the ear of giants, and this idea is going to spread like wildfire. Or I could just have a viral marketing campaign. I can just get a product that by its nature, everybody tells 2 people, and all I do is have to, just wake up on launch day and hit the first little domino. These don't work. None of these ever work for a few key reasons. They take a tremendous amount of time. They take a tremendous amount of money. They won't succeed, and you built so little value that you'll have to give up a tremendous amount of your, if you can even get anybody involved whatsoever, you can get a tremendous amount, you'll have to give up a tremendous amount of the company to get anybody involved. So there's a tremendous amount that you can do really early on to build real value. And before you do any of this. You know, that your idea, whatever becomes successful, if something becomes successful, it's not, you know, because I can tell somebody a sentence about my idea without them having signed an NDA, and they're going to go ahead and do it. If somebody else can hear your idea and go ahead and do it, you're the wrong person to do your idea. If you're doing an idea because you're not the right person to do it, but it just seems like such an awesome market and opportunity, and oh my God, nobody's ever thought of it, you're the wrong person to do it. Somebody else is a better person to do it. Somebody else is going to want to do that more, and it is a goddamn slog some days to get something off the ground, to wake up and have that passion to do it. If you're not doing something that is, you know, intrinsically has to be done by you, don't do it. Let somebody else do it. You'll fail doing it. But before you get there, there's a lot that you can do to really validate and provide very quick value that will help you get investors, that'll help you get a technical founder. You know, when I started my first company in 2001, we had 8 guys on the phone, and I spent 50 grand on a PBX phone closet. I don't know if anybody knows what a PBX phone closet are, but they suck and they're expensive. And we had this guy come like twice a week to come in and like wiggle wires and charge me 2 grand, and I hated him every time he came, and I hated him every time he left. Now I've got an $18 a month subscription to Grasshopper, and I don't have to worry about it. It has become infinitely easier to start to do something, to start to prove something. And you're not trying to launch a $10 million company the day that it launches, but there's a lot that you can do to say, you know, you don't need the $50,000 phone system. You know, there's, you know, from the Amazon to Google, there's this tremendous amount of infrastructure that allows you to do stuff incredibly quickly. Do it before you try to get out there. If I tried to get a co-founder, somebody to build it, or if I had some basic ugly idea and I was able to get an investor, shit, imagine if I spent 4 weeks and I got 2,000 people to sign up, what my valuation would be. If you've got something that you can get anybody to buy in with so little proven, spend 4 weeks, prove something, you know, and if you can add value so quickly at the beginning of that company, you'll be much better off for it. This is it, kind of from, you know, what is a prototype, right? So this is really about how do you build a prototype that can actually test some of your basic assumptions. And generally, you're not trying to prove 50 different things. You're not trying to have, you know, a billion different features. You're trying to have something that proves your point, that proves that you've got something that's valuable. I had a buddy of mine that was starting a carpool service. He's a really smart guy. He's probably brilliant. And brilliant people, I think, have I'd say a disadvantage in startups because they come up with brilliant solutions to problems that might not exist. And they can find incredibly clever ways of solving things that are not the key thing to solve. But he's a brilliant guy, and what he's doing now is actually pretty successful. But he wanted to start a carpool service. I'm going to do this online carpool sharing, whatnot. First of all, what I have to figure out is, do I have enough drivers versus riders? And he had this, like, you know, beautiful mind, page of math. Actually legitimately wrote it on his windows. I think that was pretty showy. I think it's like, dude, I know you've got notebooks. You can just write it down. We get that there's algorithms. But he did it, and he had them, and he said, you know, this is the drivers versus riders. Here's how it has to work. If I can ensure that I can get this much drivers versus riders, it has to have this ratio. And then like a month and a half later, I went up to him. He's like, well, I've tweaked my algorithm, but I've realized that riders 15% of the time will also become drivers, and here are these incentives that will actually drive people from being a carpool member to being a carpool driver. And then he's like, okay, now I have to figure out, do I need saturation, or can I launch in 12 metro areas? It's like, well, do I need metro? Do I need suburban? Do I try to get work people? Do I sell to HR? And then eventually, and I kind of worked with him through this, and I'm like, you know, what's the least that you can do? Right? What's the least that you can do to say, yes, this is worth me doing the next step, or no, I should do something else? And eventually what this whole thing boiled down to is he built up a landing page. He built up this thing that said, like, and he built up ads, and he said, we're running a carpool service in your area. It's great. It's free or near free or super cheap. Do you want to sign up? And there was a link. And once somebody signed up, it was like, oh, sorry, we're actually still building it. And he's like, if I can get people at, you know, I'm going to do this ad buy, I've got $1,000. If I can get people at less than $1.50 each to sign up, even with an ugly site, then I know I've got something that works. And he had 3 people sign up. So his acquisition was $350 a person. People didn't want a carpool. And you have an ugly site, you can get a pretty site and go from 3 people to 8 people, or maybe 3 people to 12 people. 4x improvement is awesome from an optimization perspective. The thing that startup folks need to focus on initially is what's the difference between an optimizable, something that is kind of an optimization issue versus an intrinsic default. Getting from 3 people to 800 people doesn't happen. It's not your site's bad, your call to action, your colors, your buttons, what's pretty. It's that you don't have a product that you can market well to an audience that will respond to it. And if he had built that goddamn landing page and spent $1,000, he would have had 6 months of his life back. And once he did it, he's like, you know what? I'm going to do something else. Even if the market's not ready, whatever it is, that was the least that he could build. And he spent 6 months worrying about all the wrong things. Worrying about things that a company that had already proven that, yes, I can get users for $1.50 each, great. Now what can you get them to do? How do you get them to spend $2? How do you get them for $1.15 each? There's all these optimization issues that are essential to a company once you've proven that you've got a fundamentally sound concept that you're capable of executing to. But don't do it before then. Do not optimize your prototype. This was, mine too, is when we were launching and I really reached deep into my 401k and said, listen, I know that these are the 12 features that you developers think we should build. I need 15. Like, this thing's got to be out of the gate great. Such a mistake. I mean, none of those features were the features that mattered. We ended up doing 4 different versions of that, deconstructing it. I actually took some of the capabilities and folded it in my company now, but almost none of it was important. If I could have said, what's the 2 things? What's the bad version of it that I can prove that it's fundamentally sound? Your product will never fail or succeed going from 12 features to 15. It's not about doing everything. It's about proving one specific value to one specific audience and showing that you can do it. It's not about how, okay, it would be great if it was optimized for Twitter, if I could share out on Instagram, right? So I've got this map thing and it's travel and we're going to plan together. It needs to share out on Instagram. People love sharing travel photos on Instagram. That's an optimization feature. That gets people to spend 20% more time. That gets, 10% more users. It's not part of proving whether this is fundamentally sound. Prove if it's sound, and then you can say, okay, now what we can we do to optimize? In that, I think, I think, the vanity in there, and it is true. I mean, as a startup founder, there's a certain amount of, necessary egotism. You've got to say, yeah, I know Google and Facebook have, they're kind of working on this, and they've got things that they're thinking about, but you know what? Those guys, they can't do it, right? I mean, they're not able to do what we're able to do because they're not, 9 smart people in a corner of a room in Cambridge that really have a new approach to this. And that is the only thing that startups have, is that flexibility and a little bit of that unrealistic ego. But you have to be careful with that, right? So you have to be able to say, you have to be able to put a very ugly baby out in the world. And you have to be able to know that it's ugly. Your initial prototype, they always say that if you're not embarrassed by your prototype, you waited too long. You got to get something out there. And I think that's important as well. What I did is I had spent everything on my initial product, and I think my vision was, time will tell, but I think my vision was essentially sound. What I wanted to do and why I wanted to do it and why I was the right person to do it, that ended up working out. So far, it looks like it's working out okay. But I had built a bunch of product that I thought met my vision, and it wasn't, right? That was not how my vision, took form. But I put everything I had into these features, right? So my vision, I got confused with what my product was these 15 features. My vision wasn't 15 features, but my product was. And I had gone all in. We eventually had to scrap everything, turn it off. I had paying customers, it was always, at that version, we had a previous version of the company, and it was always, right when we were, and it was me and 2 guys, and right when we were about to get, right when we needed it, we had the next client come in. We never went all the way broke, but it was this lukewarm success, which is almost worse than failure because it can keep feeding you. And eventually we said, all right, we're not going to take those checks. We're going to tell these clients no. We know what this should be, but we have this debt. We have this product debt. We're so tied to our product that we need to be honest with ourselves and pull off a Band-Aid that at that point will become incredibly painful. If you optimize and tweak and make a pretty prototype and you love the button that you built, if it comes to the point where your vision doesn't need that button, you're still going to put it in there. There's a great quote by Hemingway that I don't remember, so I'm going to misquote it. But the basics of it is that, for the sake of a story, you have to be able to throw out the lines you like the most. And if you and it's tough to find that part of it that you love and say, but that's part of my product, not part of my vision. And at this early stage, you're proving out your vision, not your product. Another issue that I had, definitely a fault that I had, is, and I had done this whole thing by contractor. I had my own mock-ups. My guys make fun of me. Whenever I mock something up, it's like, here's a rectangle, and here's other rectangles, and here's rectangles that fit in them. I've got good instinct on product. I'm a product guy. I'm not a design guy. And I would show this very early prototype to people, and I'd be like, oh yeah, we've got 12,000 users. And they're like, yeah, but it's kind of ugly. And I'm like, no, it's not ugly. It's awesome. It's optimized. It's perfect. It's everything that it should be, which was completely the wrong answer. I wanted this product to be impressive. What was impressive is, yes, I can't design for shit. Here's an ugly product. I've got 12,000 people that can't stop using it. That's more impressive. That's why your vision is impressive and not your product. Do not defend your ugly baby. And I had designers eventually when I was raising money, and they're like, this page is ugly. I'm like, yeah, and it works. Imagine what a good page would do. That's how strong my vision is, that it can stay out of the way of my bad product, of my ugly baby, of my buttons, of my clunky interface, of my 3-step sign-on process. And good investors will see that. And if you're trying to attract, the good incubators will see that. They don't want that stubbornness to say that this will never change. If I can validate something that can absolutely be optimized, that I can tweak and I can pretty and you can hire designers, then you've validated it even more so because it's ugly and there is room to optimize. But you've proven that fundamental basis. And telling people it's good never convinces them it's good, right? It's oh, it is pretty. It's like, yeah, all right, they'll just stop telling you it's ugly to your face. So doing that as well, you view everything through what you already have, through the lens of what your existing product is, and you'll get stubborn on where you should change, where you should admit that you're wrong, and when you have to cut those losses, it'll be that much costlier. So this slide in particular, I don't know if anybody remembers this. This is Pulp Fiction, which is kind of found and was somewhat inspired. I don't know if you remember the scene that they were having here, but here's very typical for that entrepreneur, for that first thing out into the world. This is where he's on the phone with Bruce Willis. It's like, you feel that sting, Butch? That's pride with you. Very true, pride with you. And as an entrepreneur, like, it takes guts, it takes stubbornness, it takes a little bit of arrogance. It takes an ability to know that you can change this that other big companies can't, but that you're going to be wrong about 80% of how you do it. And you have to have that weird, stubborn flexibility. And not cement yourself to product, cement yourself to vision. You can talk to investors, you can talk investors into something, you can fool the press into something, you can, fool some company to believe you're something bigger than you are, and maybe make a partnership out of yourself. You can't fool yourself. If you ever get to the point where you're trying to talk yourself into it, where you know that you're fooling yourself, you're screwed. You've got to have that absolutely brutal honesty, and you've got to be able to kind of really quickly learn from your own mistakes, and then wake up in the morning and say, but my vision's good, but this core is good. And testing a foundation that having built that in a way where you can actually test how that foundation works, where you can actually strip it down to its guts, to its ugly, ugly core, and know how it performs. That core has to be battle tested, and that core is not 15 features. It's 3 points, right? How do you, or whatever it is, it's a really small nucleus of what's truly important to that company. And to say that I know that I might be wrong about this, this, and this, but I know this is true, and I know this is true, and I know this is going to happen, and I'm the best company to take advantage of it. We have an exercise internally at the company where we say, what do we do as a company? And we break this down for every department and then for every person. But I always say, kind of, what's your 5 things? And we've got like, here's our 5 weekly things, here's our 5 product things. But as a company, what do we do? What's true for us that if this is true, that we are successful? And I've been in companies where it's like, here's the 23 things that are important. It's like nobody's about 23 things. At the most, there's 5 key reasons why you could be right. And then even for our customers, one of the constant disciplines is somebody's like, oh, we can also do this, we can also do this. You have a very small amount of somebody else's mind that you can rent, right? You're a company about one thing. What is your one thing? Why are you there? And if you can't, and I think you've really got to pound and hammer and chisel that so that you know your one thing. You know why you're a company. It's incredibly important to have that. You go from one person testing a bunch of stuff to 3 people to 10 people to all these customers. There's going to be a lot of conflicting visions. There's going to be a lot of different ways that you can start to execute it. You've got to let everybody know, we're a company about one thing. And bringing people in that understand that vision, that feel bought in from that vision. There's a lot of different ways you'll execute that. There's some different people you'll sell that to. But to really have that core nucleus is incredibly important. And this is the phase where you have to figure that out. A prototype is really very much the least that you can build. What is the very, 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 very least that you can build? And then examine that plan and figure out, okay, can I do less? Like really I've never seen a company fail because they did too little for the first step. Never, ever. And it's a tough thing to do. I've had stories of people that have said, how do I validate? What do I do? And that have actually gone. I've got a good buddy of mine that had this great vision, spent a whole lot of time, put 6 months into it, and then scrapped it. And what he did instead, his second version of the product was a clipboard. And he hung out at the Charles MGH T-stop, and he waited to see people running for their trains and just missed them. And he'd go up, he's like, excuse me, do you have 3 minutes? And nobody's like, And he asked people, he's like, I'm going to do this, and really get their feedback. I'll get into that in a little bit. But with any prototype, I think you've got to say, what's important to measure? What can you do quickly that proves value? And initially, it's very few things. There's not that much that's important. Similar to those kind of 5 things, what is important to you? And then what's the hierarchy of that? One of the ways that I've phrased this is, if you have a conversation with somebody you're kind of talking to your startup about, and there's that term occasionally, the wantrepreneurs that have that idea but don't do anything. And you see them, I'm going to do this. And you see them 3 months later, I'm going to do this. We're tweaking this. We're about to launch. I know folks that have been like about to launch for like 15 months now. And it's like, do something. But if you were to catch up with somebody 4 weeks, 6 weeks later, like, oh yeah, I remember that. What's changed? What could you tell them that would really be impressive? That would not just mean something to them, but would mean something to you to say. And I'll talk a little bit about how to hack some of these really quickly. There are definitely good ways to do it. But, it's easy to get up into secondary metrics. And to my buddy with his carpool algorithm and finding out the right, validating buyers versus drivers and the incentives it takes one from another. Depends on the company. But for a lot of companies, you're generally not, from a measurement perspective, as unique and beautiful as a snowflake as you might imagine. There's a lot of these very hard metrics that are the same for most of us. Figure out what yours are, but kind of mine, and this is a template that I think, depending on what you're doing, could slap onto about 70% of companies. So revenue matters, customers, users, additions to team. Are you building the team? Are you attracting other people? Actions, what's the product putting out? And then kind of actions per user. And I can get into these a little bit. I've got a slide where I'll talk a little bit about how you can start to hack these and how you can actually drive change in them. One thing that you don't want, and the last thing here is, nice things people say in response to leading questions so they don't have to crush your dreams. You can get a lot of people to say nice things about you. And, a bucket full of that doesn't get you a whole lot. So really, how do you start to validate the idea? Some of it is going to be talking to people. How do you talk to people? I've got some, what's useful feedback and useful questions. I'll get into that. But it's also about, with these goals, there's kind of twofold. So I think especially in the rise of sort of some of the accelerators and, some very early investors, there's the goals that matter to me. So what fundamentally means that my vision is right? Versus, what could I do that shows somebody, what can I show somebody that's impressive? At this point, you really got to tune out some of those external voices, right? That you can make something look important to somebody else. There's always that kind of Hollywood facade where it looks great and it feels great, and as soon as you kind of walk sideways to it, you realize it's a front and there's nothing behind it. And a lot of companies take that way too far. I've seen, and then fail. Do something that's initially valuable to you, but at the same point, have it something that is kind of external, something that you can show someone, and something that is a very hard to find number. So I like revenue, customers, users. These are important to me as well. Granted, there's a difference between proving value and kind of having something that just kind of falsely looks valuable. You want something you can show someone, but you don't want it to be something for show. But it is important that you write it down and that it is sort of an external variable there. It is, something that you're actually driving to and measuring yourself against. Here's grandma here. Not my particular grandma, but she seems really nice. So this is part of customer validation. Before you start building, you've got to talk to people. My buddy that was out on the T station, I don't know if you've ever tried to talk to 120 strangers in a day. It's awkward. But strangers can give you the best advice depending if that's the kind of person that you want to talk to. You got to get out. You got to talk to people you don't know. You've got to ask hard questions. You will get, if you want somebody to say nice things about your idea, they will do it. And I did this a lot. What do you think? Isn't this clever? Isn't this great? Isn't this amazing? Yes. That nobody wants to crush your dreams, but it's not useful, and it feeds into that vanity. But it means that if you're great and your vision's great and you're meant to do this, it just eats 6 months of your life and maybe any runway you have to get your idea off the ground. So part of this is the ego, to know that you're going to be wrong about the execution, and then how you can really get people to say bad things about your idea. I call this the kind of the grandma syndrome. Don't ask grandma. Don't ask anybody you know. Anybody you know well is not candid advice. It's not good advice. It's not useful. And then when you do ask, don't ask vague or leading questions. Do you like it? What else should we add? You've got to force people to say mean things about it. So you say, why wouldn't you use it? Can you, what else are you using right now? Do you like it? How long did it take to choose that? How long would it take you to switch? And don't ask kind of questions that don't also require commitment. There's a lot of, can I come back in 6 months? Can I show you this in 3 months? Can you give me somebody else's name that I could show it to? You really got to ask questions that specifically capture intent. Initially we had a version of this thing that everybody thought was incredibly interesting. And we were doing crowdsourcing and, mobile-based crowdsourcing when the iPhone came out. Oh my God, it's mobile crowdsourcing. Those 2 words, amazing. Okay, now pay us for it. Okay, hold on. Different conversation. It's the kind of thing that people wanted to seem innovative about. It's the kind of thing that they wanted to be expert about. We had news releases that would get 142 tweets and 8 clicks, which means that less than 10% of the people that bothered to tell other people about it actually clicked on the damn link themselves, right? That there is this, I want to cultivate a persona of this is the kind of thing that I'm interested in. And that was part of the challenge, is getting from interesting to imperative. Getting from the kind of thing that I want to sound, and if it's not too hard to build something that sounds interesting, that sounds appealing, that sounds like something that I want to keep track of, but is it actually solving something crucial? Is it something that you can implement? Is it something that you have budget for? Are you the person that does this? Who does this? Who picks it? How long do you choose? What's a vendor cycle look like? All these questions we learned to ask after people had already said, this is great, this is awesome. And then we'd get 2 months of them saying like, I'll show somebody else and they'll say the same thing. We weren't asking questions that force people to say no. We have this in our current sales process, something that I've kind of termed the PMG, which is we get to a point, we show somebody, this is great. Can you send us 5 slides and I'm going to show it around and I'm going to, and we'll tell you what we think. And initially we try to figure out what are the right 5 slides, how do we present it, what are the notes, what's the right level of detail, and then several painful months later I realized the correct answer is no. No, you can't, because it's not your job to tell a room full of people 5 slides on what my product does. That's my job. So we can either have, if you're ready for a proposal, great. If there's other people that need to see it, let's get a meeting, I'll talk to those people, or goodbye. You seem like a really nice person, let's keep in touch. But not chasing, if you can't get to that next step. I mean, this is from sales, but even from a product validation, if it's this sort of very loose-ended neat that isn't tied to action, I think you're really, it's easy to chase false validation. And whatever you can do to kind of cut that down. And then to understand what your actual obstacles are going to be. So if somebody said, this is a great travel app, or this is a great carpool app, great. Let's get all the features I want. Awesome. It's like, do you carpool? Oh, no. I take the T, or I'd never let a weirdo in my car. There's beneath the surface of every compliment is a reason they won't use it. And you've got to find the right people, and you've got to understand every single thing that it would take to really prove out what you're right about, what you're wrong about, and what you're going to have to solve for. This is really important. This is probably one of the single best things I learned about telling my idea to people and understanding how well my idea resonates. Tell somebody about your idea. Give them the short version. Give them the 30 seconds. Give them 2 minutes. And then stop talking. Great, I love it. That's perfect. That's exactly what we need. Great. Tell me what we are. Have them give the pitch back. And it is so much different than what you told them. It's a little weird to do, but please do it. Just kind of have other people give your pitch back to you after you've given it to them, and what's important to them will really come through. Sometimes they extrapolate on great things that are really, you didn't even tell them but are essential to your product. Sometimes they have an idea of something completely different. But that little trick has helped me a ton. And you really get to understand why, do they get you, what are they wrong about, and what really truly resonates. Even if you've got the right ingredients in there, depending on who you talk to, what they think is most important, what they think is most impressive, is very rarely what is not always what you think is. And to hear it in their own words is great, especially if you're selling to, whatever. If you're selling to enterprise HR reps, what they say, how they say it, is going to be in the language of the people that you try to sell it to. So really, really kind of capture that. So here's some useful questions that work for me. Are we like anything else you're currently using? So what? Are we competitive? Are we complementary? Why do you use them? How do you use them? Who uses them in your organization? How much do you pay for it? Like, people will answer a ton of stuff. And initially, even on sales calls, where I'd have somebody on the phone, I'm like, man, I wonder if this is even the person that buys it. And I'd have like 3 meetings with them. And then, now that I've gotten, learned a little bit about that, like 10 minutes in, I'm like, so are you the person that buys this? I'm like, oh, well, I inform it, but it's really my boss, or we've got this outside group, or oh, no, all that's done through our agency. People will tell you a tremendous amount of stuff. Customers, prospects, investors, ask. You can ask a whole lot of questions. I've probably asked, 200 questions I was slightly uncomfortable asking, and I've had 2 times where it's come back at me, where somebody's like, well, and they're really like, well, I'd probably rather not talk about that. Or we can talk about that later on in the deal. You can ask for a ton more information. And I'd always try to say like, well, I could tell from the tone of the voice and their inflection and the way they held their hands. It's like, hey, why don't you ask them? as far as kind of what's painful about switching, how do you measure it? So if this is something that somebody's interested in, why do they want it? What would they do with it? How would they measure it? I think and we do a lot inside enterprise, inside big brands. So kind of who makes a decision? Where's the budget? How long's a cycle? How much would you pay? I think one of the things to be crucial is once you've kind of checked the boxes on interesting, what would you start doing with it on the first week? Is this imperative versus interesting? One of the things I've heard is, and this one isn't mine, but like for a company, your main value prop, your one big thing, vitamins are nice. If I give you vitamins, a little bit of B2, you're going to walk around, you're going to be a little bit peppier. Maybe they work, maybe they don't. People buy painkillers. Don't sell vitamins, sell painkillers. Like you have this and it really goddamn hurts. You do this and it won't. Getting somebody incrementally better on a problem they didn't know they had is a slow way to go. You've really got to, people want to buy that painkiller that says, hey, do you have this? I'm like, yeah, it sucks. My boss yells at me every quarter. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what we're going to do about it. That's what people buy. That's what people need. Now, obviously, that's for kind of an enterprise model, but from a consumer as well. If I'm going to say, are you looking for a way that you can tell, one of the things that I'm so goddamn sick of, and we hear about it for the last 12 years, is the goddamn connected refrigerator. And I'm sorry if that's somebody's idea. I don't like it. But like that at some point in the extraordinarily near future, we're going to need refrigerators that can talk to us on the internet and tell us how much milk they have left. And it seems like the technology is always right on the cusp, and now there's a bunch of things that do it. CES, they always have like 4 refrigerators in the back where somebody's like, this year we did it. Nobody wants a refrigerator that talks to the internet. Stop building it. But it's technically feasible. And even if it's neat, and maybe you could sell to a couple gadget heads that need to have everything, but it's not a problem people have. And it's not a strong problem anybody has. It's wow, wouldn't that be kind of cool? I wonder what my, broccoli is doing on Pinterest right now. So, products that do well, especially at startups. If you're GE and you can teach a whole generation of people to want, tweetable groceries, fine. That's a big corporate problem. I don't think they're right, but go for it. You're a startup. You're not going to teach anybody to want anything new. Nobody wants anything new for the most part, or nobody wants to. No, you can't teach them to want that. It's something that they either want now, and maybe they don't want your exact product. You had Henry Ford said that if I had asked everybody what they had wanted, they would have said faster horses, right? So maybe they don't know exactly what the car should be, or how the carburetor works, or how many horsepowers, or what color they want. They know they want to go faster. People always want to go faster, but the technology enables that, teaching them that they want to go faster. This one's been really powerful for me. I'll get into it a little bit in the next slide as far as kind of how you can start to hack some of these growth metrics. Will you sign this piece of paper? This is really useful, really powerful, and pretty damn easy. If somebody's like, this is great, I'd love to have it, try to get customers, but talk about it a little bit here. So, and I'll get into this on customers, but as far as how to hack real improvement in 4 weeks, kind of what's changed, you're talking to that person, what do I want to show that I'm proud about? This is a sample list, but from revenue, GFD. This is one of the things that my investors, early investors, one of my first, it's a good guy, he's a little gruff, we get along, but when he was talking about how do we measure revenue? Is it when it's sent? Is it when it's received? Is it a customer that's 80% likely to close for $100,000? Can we count it as $80,000? He's like, GFD, Dan, GFD. Green dollars. What's in there now? And GFD goes a long way. GFD with investors, if you can charge somebody $50 for something, congratulations, you're a post-revenue company. Having something that, if you can get a bunch of people to pay $50, even better, but that first initial traction, even if it's a few people, even if it's for something ugly, even if it's for something manual, getting some GFD in there goes a hell of a long way. there's a, I've always heard they're all liars till they're buyers, right? Everybody wants something until they have to get it, until they have to buy it. Everybody has an intent to do something until they've done something. So the quicker that you can get in $1, I would, depending on certain types of companies, but if early startups, I've mentioned my brilliant friends. I am perhaps not brilliant. I'm simple enough to know that I want to make money doing what I'm doing, that I want my product to make money, that I want my value to be that other people are paying me, that other people find it valuable. Money is a great way to kind of denote that somebody else finds it valuable. They've given you money. That money can be exchanged for goods and services. It's valuable. It really is a great catalyst. It really does sort of can really cut into that and define what is valuable. And it's interesting too, from an app marketplace, we used to build apps. I don't anymore. I'm happy to not build them or have contractors build them. But the difference on an app store, if you go from an amazing, incredible, successful app that does a whole bunch of stuff that's free to the same app that now charges $1, if there's nobody else that you're directly competing against, you drop 97% of your users. From $0 to $1, you drop 97%. So what people will use, what people will look at, what people will be interested in versus what they pay for. What's valuable enough that they go into their pocket for is a really stark differentiator. Especially in the term of kind of quasi-users where I could say, well, we've got followers or tweeters or somebody that puts something into an app or signed in. What constitutes a user can occasionally be vague. Revenue is great. Customers. So this is what I talked about as far as if you can get somebody to pay $1 for it, that's great. If you're trying to get GE to fork out 80 grand on a really ugly prototype, it might not happen. But if you are at a very early stage and you can get somebody and you can get in front of that guy that would eventually buy it or the woman that would eventually buy it, and you say, why would you buy it? How valuable is it? Yes, it's great. And they tell you, man, if you could finish building this, if you can get these 3 features, we're in. This solves a huge problem for us. Great. Can I get a non-binding letter of intent? Non-binding letter of intent. It says at the beginning, like, this is not a contract. Like, this is a non-binding letter of intent that states that if we do this, 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 and this, you have an intent to buy. I mean, it's a contractual equivalent of nothing, right? But to get somebody to do that, I found that when I would get somebody all the way to that 99-yard line, here, great, launch it, we'll do this. At the very early stage while we were going from AppSwell, the previous company, to Crowdly, we're in, we're your first customer. This is so exciting. Will you sign this? Well, actually, I'm not the one that makes these agreements. It generally happens above me. My boss would have to decide. It's like, why the f haven't we been talking to him? This is my 8th meeting here. I don't swear so much in the client meetings. The 8th one I might a little bit. But you get to find out your real buying process. You get to figure out, it's like, well, we actually have a contractual thing with the agency and they have to vet everything, they have to approve everything. It's like, oh, you haven't gotten to yes yet. On the other hand, if you can get these, I had a friend that did this. They were trying to put a solution that went into gyms across the country, to fitness clubs. And crowded space, there's a lot of companies that are trying to do it. He got 6 letters of intent from, 6 pretty small, not even chains, but just sort of groups of gyms, and he got investment. Like, that's great. It's not customers, but you can sort of approximate customers. It's not GFD. Jim wouldn't let me count that in the revenue, but getting that letter of intent cuts through a ton of that process. And from a growth hack perspective, it's a really quick thing that you can do. Because if I go in front of an investor or an incubator and I say, listen, I get a lot of people that say great things about me. It's like, oh, awesome. Tell your grandma I said hi. But if I can say, I've got 6 letters of intent from these 6, I'm targeting gyms. I've talked to 15. I've got 6 letters of intent. Good. I mean, it shows that you're persistent enough to get in front of the right person, that you know how to actually sell the damn thing. You're talking to the people that will buy it, and that you're serious about proving this value. And you can get letter of intent with, a PowerPoint, with that ugly prototype. Users are obviously very valuable. And this is sort of a descending list of value for me. But users are good. Signups are good. number, that's obviously something that people look for, specifically if you got something that is going to be primarily consumer-based. Even that pre-regs. So like I mentioned, my buddy with a carpool that put up a landing page. If you can say, I got 4,000 people to a landing page versus I got 6,000 people to an early prototype, I mean, they're great. You build out a prototype. Maybe that prototype took you 2 more months. 4,000 people with this landing page sounds just as impressive if you're trying to get to that incubator, to those investors, or to attract a technical co-founder. And technical co-founders, they're it's occasionally like that high school dance sort of mentality where there's a few kind of floating around the edges and everybody's trying to date them and like, oh, hey, buddy, how's it going? Let's grab drinks. And you have a couple drinks and a little tipsy and you kind of like, they know it's coming, they see it's coming, they've totally got you in the co-founder friend zone and you're like, how's that contracting work? You ever think about getting into a startup? It's like, oh, you put the awkward move on, and they're like, and they see it coming and they get hit on a lot, right? And if you're some guy in a PowerPoint, like, all right, okay, cool, who cares? I got 4,000 people to a landing page. I got users at $1.30 each. They're not doing anything yet because I haven't built anything. My ugly baby has value. So even going out at that level and getting those people excited about building your thing and to show that like I'm a guy that can actually do it. Within 4 weeks, with nothing, with this kind of stone soup, I've cobbled this together, right? So whoever you're trying to attract, whoever you're getting excited about, you're going to learn a shitload about what you're wrong about. You're going to refine your vision. You're going to be more confident about what part of it is fundamental to what you're doing. But you're also going to be, you're eventually going to have to get somebody else excited. And having some of these hacks to go to somebody and say, I've got 4 letters of intent. It shows that you can execute and it shows real value. You're not just some that entrepreneur. Additions to the team. So that's a component of it as well. Early on with no money, it's hard to hire a lot of people because you can't pay them. Specifically towards, I think, well, this is valuable a lot of places, but towards the incubators or the investors, having a good team, having strong people that believe in what you're doing is really important. It's okay if you can't pay them. It's okay if they're not full-time. If you could say, I've got 3 great people lined up, and they're really contributing, they're helpful, I've got 10 hours a week, whatever it is. Get their sort of fractional commitment and say, and I've got Mark, and he's an amazing developer, and when we get to 10,000 signups, he's going from 10 hours a week to 20 hours a week. And when we get to 15,000 signups, he's going full-time. That I've got this team that's going to build as my progression builds. And another thing here is, for these people, as you're starting to find these people that are excited about your team, validate that with them as well. Like, here's my expectation. Like, we start off, we're going to do, I need this much time initially. And then what would be compelling to you? What would have to be true for you to want to come on full time? Or to go from 5 hours a week to 15 hours a week? That we do this every night, Tuesdays and Thursdays after work, you come over and we do this until midnight. What would have to be true for you to be this excited? This goes back to some of your own core metrics, but having that discussion, getting other people excited and understanding what matters to them. I had a couple of these folks where I had, I had developers that we're in kind of that are contracting, but maybe they'll come over to perm. But I did, I danced around it, and I didn't want to make it awkward, and I didn't really have that explicit, what's going to happen here. I'm like, well, nothing. Like, I'm working 20 hours a week, making a good amount of money. I sleep till noon. I stop at 5. Like, I'm going to be a contractor forever. You do have this kind of this nomadic sort of contractor class that can do that. You don't want to spend a lot of time barking up the wrong tree. If this is a contractor, great. I use contractors, use good ones. I could fill another several hours on how to not pick bad contractors and how to not screw up your engagements with good contractors. But know that everybody that is involved in your project is not going to come on full time, that you're not going to suddenly amaze everybody and win them over if you haven't had that discussion. So what needs to be true for you to come over? That can happen with investors as well. That if you are, with investors, it's very true. If you want advice, ask for money. If you want money, ask for advice. You can't say like, hey, I want your money. Go to them and say, we're not raising right now. I wouldn't take your check if we could get it. But what's important is 4 months now, we're considering maybe doing it in the future, maybe 4 months from now. what do you think about this? I want your candid feedback. Also, for you, what would have to be true in 4 months from what we've done now for you to get involved? Or would you not? And if they said like, well, a combination of things, we want to see progress, we want to see traction, that just means like, I don't believe that this will work, but I don't want to be the guy that loses the awesome deal in my firm and looks like, so I'm going to try to infinitely keep the door open. There's a lot of investors that figure if they never say no, that it just stays open infinitely. But it also means that all the nice things that they said about you, if you can't say, what would be true, then, and maybe there's a lot of really smart investors out there as well, maybe you're not at a stage yet where they're ready to see what the next phase of your company is. Maybe your idea is still a little raw, but if you really think that I'm on a projection here where this is where we're going in 4 months, figure out who the people that are bought in on that and get their perspective. If they said, if you can get, if you can get 3,000 users, that's great, I'm in. I had a group of investors that were super excited after we started to have some revenue. And like, well, what we really want is we want about 15 enterprise customers, and we want to see that at least 70% of them retain, like on our annual contracts. Right, okay. So we're trying to raise, and this was early before we did our last round, we're trying to raise 300 grand, and what you want is $2.5 million of recurring revenue before you'll put your 300 grand in. And I'm like, all right, that was the goodbye. It seemed like nice people, let's keep in touch. So find out what's important to them, but find out if you've got people that might be those right partners down the road. Actions, this is a lot of kind of how the product works, how well the product executes. Turk it. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Mechanical Turk, sort of an example of something you can do on Amazon. The real story of so Mechanical Turk is a way that you can pay people to do sort of micro actions for like 10 cents each in huge volume. I had a great friend that did this. He had a service that you could tweet to it, and based on the history of your tweets, it would tell you what restaurants you might be interested near you. And there's a lot of math, and there's a lot of algorithms, and there's a lot of shit that he didn't want to build because it's hard to build and it's expensive, and he didn't know if people wanted to use it. So he hired people for 25 cents each to tweet out recommendations, restaurant recommendations for those people. And it's like, look at the magic of my algorithm. And it wasn't. It was like a room full of people at 25 cents a pop, and he got his first, and he launched this, and he only spent about $600 on Mechanical Turk because nobody actually wanted to tweet something and find restaurant recommendations. And he didn't have to build all that big algorithm. He did something else that later became successful. The real Mechanical Turk story, there was actually, so Amazon calls that Mechanical Turk. There's a lot of other services. But the story behind this is like, you're kind of the Wizard of Oz at this point, right? Nobody else needs to be behind the curtain. That is your curtain. And at these very early stages, if you can fake it behind the curtain, if they can't tell the difference, what difference does it make? And that's not scalable. Eventually, you don't want, your service is not a way that you can pay people a quarter to tweet out restaurant recommendations, but you can prove out a hell of a lot really quickly without having to build out the guts of what it'll eventually be. I love the real Mechanical Turk story. It was actually several hundred years ago, somebody built a robot, a Mechanical Turk, that they actually took around and toured the courts of Europe, and it beat all these princes and kings in chess. So they built this real moving robot, and you could open up its chest and you could look at the gears, and nobody knew how it did. And it did it for like 30 years, toured all the courts of Europe, and was this technical marvel. And the guy was instantly, the person that engineered it was this friend of kings and very rich, and died in his mansion. And like 3 years after they died, they realized he had stuck a really smart midget in its belly. So, really smart midgets, they go a long way. So actions per user are really important as well. So this is something that if you're going to say, especially if you're kind of paying for users, there's a lot that you can do to say, I got somebody to sign up, but what are they doing? Are they coming back? Are they engaging with it? Don't worry about optimization here. Don't worry about saying, well, I need 3.2 visits per user, and I've only got 2.7. It's absolutely solvable. You can do that. But if I know that I need to have somebody take 30 actions and nobody comes back, you've got a fundamental problem. Again, don't focus on, you're always going to optimize. So a ton of the rest of your company is going to be optimizing. Find out here is what is where are the fundamental differences versus sort of the things that you can optimize. But looking at users is a number, but actions is really where you start to dig in and you figure out, great, I've got something that I can optimize towards. What's really important in this as well is learn what useful things that you were wrong about. So if you have a set of assumptions, borrowing, I think Mike Troiano's got a great deck, if anybody's had a chance to see him speak. And he's like, hey, you've got a fundamental set of expectations. When's he here?
Oh, he was here with Michael Scott.
Oh, nice. Yeah, he's great. But if you've got all these fundamental assumptions that are important to your company, and they change all the time, and they move all the time, and you reflect on them all the time, hey, maybe you should write them down. And I think at the early point, the first time I heard that, I'm like, oh, shit, we haven't written them down. And they move so much, and you think like, well, I know what they are. Obviously, they're the fundamental pillars to my business, and I measure them all the time. But it's kind of like, wind on sand. The whole thing moves. 3 months later, it's shifted, and you're not always. It's important to be able to look back and remember that it's shifted. But see what you're wrong about. I'm going to get into Q&A in a little bit here, but just super quick, some tools that are really useful. So as I mentioned, my PBX phone closet horror story, it's really easy to prove a lot of value pretty quickly, or to prove some value, and to kind of understand what you might be wrong about. First thing is get a domain name. If you were sending me something from a Hotmail address, like you do not have you have a hobby. Get a domain, get your email, buy that domain if you're going to get anybody to take you serious. I have a huge pet peeve. A ton of people will disagree with me. Spell your domain right. If the first thing you get to say to everybody at a cocktail party is like, here's the name of my company. And then the second thing you say is, and here's how you spell it. Oh man, it's just great. I'm an old writing major, so that's my particular bias. But yeah, spell your domain correctly. No like crazy extra K, leave out an E, get something, even if it's, Crowdly is not a real word in case anybody wants to call me on that, but we spelled it right. That it should seem how it should be spelled. Google Apps is really useful. You don't have to spend a whole lot of money on software, but there's a lot of tools here. Put that on your own domain. Have a professional looking email address. Nobody's going to, with anything, I think you want to make sure you're a good version of what you are. You are not a 400-person company. And you're not going to convince anybody worth convincing that you're a 400-person company. If you're 3 smart people in Cambridge, be 3 smart people in Cambridge. But be a good version of that. So being professional is not about trying to convince anybody otherwise, just being a good version. Project tracking is really important, I think. There's a lot of, spend the work and prioritize what you're going to do. Really define well why you want to do it. So here's what we want to do. Here's why we want to do it. And I always try to do this in our teams. Once we're there and we like our answer and then how we're going to measure it, I always say, and why shouldn't we do it? Right? Try to convince yourself out of it. If you can convince yourself not to do something, don't do it, or don't do it now. But track what you intend to do, especially as the team gets larger. Track how you do against it. There's a bunch of tools that we use. Trello is a good one for project management, Asana. A lot of these are kind of free versions. The site landing page, these got a little bit done to death, but I think it's still a good important step. There's a lot of folks that are, you had some companies that raised like $4 million and still had just a landing page. But a landing page is basically a site that you can build that you can send traffic to, where you can ask people to sign up for something, and then they're kind of generally, they'll get to a very simplified version of something afterwards, or it'll be a, thanks, you're signed up, we'll tell you when we've launched. I really still strongly recommend them. There's a tremendous amount that you can.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So I get this question all the time. So you sell to enterprises. How do landing pages work with enterprises?
Yeah, so landing pages work much better when you're looking at specifically consumer. I think there's some of it if you're going to say, so if you're really saying that getting a big brand to sign up, I don't think you're going to get a ton of signups there. But if you've got like a blog that's, first thing we're going to do is really start talking about this and why it's important. We've got a social media manager now, so she looks at like all the brand managers on Twitter and chats them up, and they come in and they sign up for the blog. So there's things that you could do to kind of validate, are they interested in signing up for the kinds of things that you talk about? But landing pages in an enterprise are a little bit different. I think they could sign up for your kind of subject matter expertise or whatnot, but most of those, if it's going to be, this is mostly kind of a self-service product. If you intend for people to come to your site and sign up by themselves, go ahead and do that. For an enterprise, something like, I think what does work well for a landing page is something like a white paper. So we have really good thought leadership on why you need, I won't be self-serving, so I'll come up with something vague, but if you have something that is explicitly about your value and germane to that particular audience, hey, download the white paper specifically on our solution for gym managers and how to maximize offline revenue. That's not my business. Yeah, I'd say that landing pages work in that regard to get people to sign up for that. Or the white papers, rather, kind of a trigger there. You can set them up really quickly, and there you're really looking at, is there actually an interest in what I'm doing? Is this something that, and not just is there an interest, can me, one person or two people or however big you are, can I acquire them at a rate that is reasonably eventually profitable for my company? If I'm trying to sell, sports scores or whatever the hell, it's like, all right, the whole rest of the internet has this. If I'm going to do recipes, it's like, oh, you know who else has recipes? Everyone. If I'm going to say like, all right, well, I'm going to do, gluten-free, non-peanut, and that's an addressable market. I can get people. I can get people to sign up for that for, $1.10 each. I can get clicks. I can buy. So another thing is how you start to kind of get traffic towards it. People are searching for it. I can start to rank in traffic. There's enough of a drive. The community around, gluten-free, peanut-free, whatever. It's a strong community. They bring other people in. So you can really start to say, can I bring in my audience at a reasonable rate? If you're going to pay $300 a click, you can get people to come in for just about anything, and you don't have to have them. If I eventually need them here at 80 cents a pop, but I can get them at $2, it's probably optimizable. If it's $20, you're not. So I'd say, yeah, from that, in that regard, get that landing page up there. I really like buying some ads, some of the PPC through AdWords and Facebook. Who are the communities? Who do I think this is going to resonate? You really got to test it. So if I'm going to say I want to sign up, gyms, and I'm going to say make more revenue, or I'm going to say, make more revenue per customer. I have another ad that says, get more people in your gym, or have them buy personal training lessons. Whatever my drivers are, if I'm trying to appeal to those, even to that same audience, what pitch do they find most valuable that will actually get them through and get them to sign up? So there's a lot that you can really do to understand how your product lives in the minds of people who will eventually buy, will eventually use. And a landing page and some bot traffic, you might quickly find, like, here's a keyword, recipes, everybody owns. It's going to be a really hard thing to own. Or do I have a niche, and then which of those messages works, which of them don't? What are the keywords? If I can get people to say that they want something and click on an ad, but then they don't click into the site, where's the disconnect? And a lot of A/B testing and a lot of tweaking. I think out of the landing page sites, I like Unbounce right now. I think they do the best job. There's a lot of great A/B testing stuff that they can do. They integrate in with Google Analytics. Definitely do Google Analytics. Learn who the people are. And this is kind of an important thing too: is what's your expected action? What do you expect people to do on the site? I want them to get to the site, and I want them to sign up for the program, or I want them to sign in. What's your conversion there? How many of them convert? If I change that, how many more? If I need to be at 10% and I'm at 7%, you get an optimizable problem. If I'm 1 in 1,000, not so much. But if you can get traffic at a reasonable rate, and then that traffic performs at a reasonable, I can get people here for 40 cents each, and they 10% of them or 25% of them convert. That's not bad. At $1.60 a person, great. Now why don't I build the damn thing? But doing that first, and then especially understanding what that message is, because as you build out the site, as you build out the product, you're going to get a lot more information on kind of what those sort of emotional hooks are that took people into action that you're going to want to put into kind of your own product identity and your own site messaging. Some kind of basic CRM I think is important. You can do some of it through Google Contacts. There's a few free things that plug into Google. You really don't want to pay a ton, and it's easy. I'm the same way. Whenever I have to do something that I don't want to do, I'll like clean the house, you know, or I always did that in college. Like, I don't want to write this paper. Why don't I just like have my dorm room immaculate? It's one of those sort of, it feels like you're doing something, but it's really procrastinating. I think there's a lot of tools where you could say, I'm going to put everything into all these wonderful, amazing online tools, and it looks amazing, and I've got the best corporate dashboard ever for a company with 2 people. Some of that is you know, vanity, and some of it's procrastination. MailChimp, SurveyMonkey, LinkedIn is good. You know, you can kind of stalk the people that you want to reach out to, get a premium membership, and just say like, hey, can I show you something for 10 minutes? It's nowhere near ready to sell you. And that's part of being kind of a good version of what you are. Don't say, I've got an amazing, fully built out product. Say, I'm a really smart person. I've got 2 other really smart people with me. We're building something that could really use 10 minutes of your advice. But find those right people. Don't find the people that are you know, around the house when you want to ask questions. Find the people that you'd eventually want to sell to. Yesware is kind of, so if I put LinkedIn as stalking, and Yesware is advanced stalking. You can actually see how they're doing with it, and if they pass it around, and what gets opens, what gets replies. Tweak your messaging, see what gets responses, do it with large numbers of people. It's awkward as hell. Nobody wants to be a spammer. Nobody wants to be that pushy guy. You know, your idea does not get validated in your own head. You have to ask other people that are not you and that do not know you, and it is awkward. Be authentic about it. Be a little bit pushy, and don't be. Scoreboard. I think it's important to kind of say, you know, as I mentioned, sort of measure what's important to you from kind of daily is probably too much from a startup, but from a weekly and a monthly basis. From a don't write a business plan, there's a lot of great stuff out there on the lean scorecard. You know, the idea there is that a business plan is a 40-page document that naive investors will ask you to produce, and they'll never read, and you'll never read, and will stick in your desk drawer, and you'll never look at again. Where if you can do what's called the Lean Startup Canvas, it's a 1-page document where you can actually honestly measure what's important to you. Google it. There's a lot of good stuff out there on the Lean Startup Canvas. It's a living document that you can actually measure what's important to you. You'll actually use. Any long documents, business plans, they'll change so quickly, and you'll never find time in a startup to go back and revise my 20-page business plan. So really kind of keep a useful, very basic dashboard on just the key stuff that's important to you. Don't worry about the secondary stuff. Yeah, so that's mostly it for the slide component of it. I know Abby has the microphone. Happy to ask questions about any of this, any of my particularly memorable failures or stumblings or occasional successes as well.
Could you please tell us a little bit more about finding a technologist and maybe some of those interesting experiences you've had with the contractors?
Yeah.
Oh, and maybe a word on incenting them as well at the very earliest phase.
On
Incenting?
Okay.
Yep.
So with anything, I'd say make sure that you're kind of explicitly clear if this is sort of a contractor or if this is a contractor to perm, and then what those triggers are. And a lot of folks will be like, yeah, I'm really interested. Let's see how it goes and let's keep the conversation going. That is a contractor. Unless you have a milestone, a trigger, something at which they get involved, you have a contractor. And know that they are not ever going to be anything different. If you have contractors, understand what their compensation is, if it's just equity or if it's paid. You have to be, I think one of the things that I've learned is you have to be very explicit, not just in kind of what you want from contractors. At the beginning, always do fixed bids. They don't like it, but it's the best way to do it. There's too much variability. Let them take that variability on. Don't just say kind of, I want this button here, but say why I want it. So with everything that we build, we say, you know, if we call them kind of the user case stories. So not just, I want a button here that gets clicked and goes here. Like, why do you want it? So whenever you're writing those, be extraordinarily, you will pretty much get what you ask for. So be really clear in sort of a spec document extraordinarily clear on everything that you want. Make sure that that's part of your agreement, and then say, here's in very big detail what I want, but here's why I want it. Because there's a lot, even regardless of how detailed they are, once they start building, if they don't have a context of why that feature is important, they'll build a weird version, or maybe they have other ideas. So I'd say definitely that. With anything on, and this is very, very true, if you've got a couple of people and everybody's devoted a different amount and their stock, do vesting extraordinarily early and figure out how to split that equity up within the team too. So if it's something where, what is everybody's participation? Okay, it's on a 4-year vest, and then if you're great and you're the technical guy and you're going to be in here 10 hours a week and I'm here 40 hours a week, maybe we both have the same amount, but you're on that prorated vest and as you keep coming up, then you vest faster. But everybody has a 6-month cliff, and everything is on a 4-year vest. There's so many companies that had, the 2 guys in a dorm room and then the third roommate. And he owns a third of the company because that weekend he said a lot, and now it's this awkward thing where it's oh, hey, buddy. Everybody raise your hand if you're in the company. Whoa, not you so fast. And people's passions change, and people's capability to do it changes as well. The team very rarely looks like it does it at the outset when it's just this idea. So be very honest, have those frank conversations, figure out how you split it, and kind of be honest about what stage they're coming in on as well. If you have 3 people, instead of figuring out, well, this guy's a little bit smarter, this guy's a little bit more involved, you've got 40%, he's got 25%, he's got 33%. If it's about even, or if it's 2 people, instead of doing 60-40, somebody's always going to resent the hell out of it, make it 50-50. Unless there's a very compelling reason not to, if you're all kind of the founders, then split it evenly, invest.
Other questions?
So I have a question about how did you make the transition from the non-technical guy to a technical guy, and what's the difficulty in making those transition? Because right now I'm learning Python. I'm a student at Harvard, so I found it's kind of difficult for me to make that transition. So
yeah, I think it's a great question. I think if I had to do it over again, I'd definitely learn more about programming. So I never became the technical guy. I still can't code. I just eventually went from contractors, and then I built enough that all of a sudden we had some funding and some investment and some great customers, and then we became a lot more appealing to be able to bring in great talent. Where they said this isn't some guy in a with a PowerPoint that this is a company going places and I want to get involved. So for me it was kind of getting that vision right, getting something that people were excited about, having traction behind it, but not becoming the developer. I think with that, when you are, and I've seen this from a lot of developers, especially when they're kind of learning and this is sort of their prototype. If your prototype fails, your very early ugly baby, you will throw it away. You'll completely discard it. If your prototype does well and you're going to build a company out of it, you're going to completely throw it away. A prototype is not an early first version of your company or of your product. The prototype is a very small disposable item where you can prove out a core value and then stop and build something real if it works. But a lot of times you'll get somebody that'll have this, they've got some sort of in-between super hacky thing, and they'll put way too much time in building out a prototype, I've got to have it scaled to 1 million users. So you'll either put too much time into the prototype or not, but I'd say at this point, feel free to build something very hacky and very small, and then once it gets there, great, then maybe you get another developer, somebody more senior that helps you with it as well. But I know for those folks that have done it, like paired programming, proving enough traction that you can get somebody to come involved, maybe at a half equity, half cash rate or whatever it is, and have them pair with you for 2 months once you've gotten past the prototype. Make that ugly prototype yourself.
Okay, so let's say you're kind of in the lucky position of having a somewhat validated vision. In other words, you've done a lot of this early stuff, you've gone through, and there are people, they want your product. You've shown that you can at least build some of the basic parts of it. It's not in its final stages, but there's a true need for what you're doing. And this is kind of, I guess, a broader question a bit, but how do you decide what to do next to make it a reality, particularly as a sort of a sole founder? In other words, should you focus on documenting your validation as maybe a way of raising money and showing that, yes, there is a need for this? Or should you be focusing more on building the product so there's something that you can put in front of people? How do you, what's a good strategy for, I guess, organizing a path forward once you've gone through those initial stages?
Yeah, I mean, so some of it depends on the company, obviously not knowing a ton about the company or the stage of the company. I mean, if this is something that you feel is absolutely ready to raise money and this is essential to have happen and you're really at a crossroads, go ahead and do that. But I'd say for the most part, build product. That value is valuable. And if I've got to take 3 months off of building value to explain to people why my thing is valuable, you can walk in with paying customers with whatever, with ugly slide decks. You notice I have an affinity for ugly slide decks. You don't have to have everything completely polished. If you've got something that's sort of slightly valuable and very polished, I'm always suspect of it. Where if I have something that's incredibly valuable, it's like, listen, we haven't had time to polish it. I mean, we raised our last round. I never had a real slide deck, and that was sort of it. It's like, oh, well, can you build us a pitch deck? It's like, no. Like, if you want in, like, we've got people, we've already got some investment. We're busy building it. If you want to come in on the opportunity, here's the opportunity. But like, we're going. Like, trains leaving the station. Some of that is because, it was a little bit, but some of it is, if you're not, if you're too polished in that, somebody's going to think that you're trying to sell them. And we were trying to raise in this last round. We were trying to raise, $700,000 initially. We got the first 200 was like pulling teeth, and then everybody wanted to come in. Everybody wanted to be the last money. And then we opened it to 900, and everybody wanted to be the last money. We ended up coming into like 1.4. Once everybody else saw that somebody else was in, that it went. Raising money is about having a really good, simple, easy to understand narrative that's true, and then having a couple very smart people say, yeah, I've looked at the details and it works out. But people very rarely, especially all the individual investors, are never going to dig into an nth degree of detail. They want that compelling narrative. They want to understand what your one thing is, and they want to know that smart people have already bought in. But polish doesn't help nearly as much as rough value does. At this stage, you're going for angel money, seed money. If you're a diamond in the rough, that's great. So I'd focus on that, but make sure it's stuff, as I said, don't do stuff that is for show, but do stuff that you can show, right? So don't have, oh, well, we got our internal processing 90% faster. I've got a couple really smart engineers. I've got one guy, we've got this algorithm that can define, like Old Spice is a client of ours. They have 3 million fans. We can tell them which one's most influential. And they have no idea who anybody is in this 3 million people. So we can say, here's all 3 million, here's what they do. And for them, it's like coming into a dark room with the lights on. It's like, oh my God, here's everybody. And I've got this, one of my engineers who's like, well, we could tweak it, we could modify it, we can make it a little bit better, I can make it 3% better. And if we could look at this 4th level derivation on this type of behavior against a cohort, and I'm like, nobody cares. Nobody cares that it's 3% better. We went from dark room to lights on. If we're going to start to tone and say, okay, well, can we get the natural shade a little lighter? And it's a technically fascinating problem, but that's not the main thing that anybody's going to look at to decide whether or not they buy. And whether or not they buy is what's important to our investors, is important to me. So make sure that the stuff that you're working on is not the wrong stuff, is not stuff that is that doesn't show well. Make it something that it's external, and that's somewhat. It's not like you don't want to care about infrastructure. That's important as well. But having something that you can show is important. At some point, you're going to need some external validation if you're looking for investors or other team members. But it also gets it out of your own head. A lot of times you can think about something that is, small and not visible to anybody else. Sometimes even that, if you think that that's, it's easy to convince yourself the wrong things are important if you don't have to put a number to it and quantify it and explain to somebody else. But yeah, build value, I'd say. Oh, if you're happy with the mic.
When you were first starting out, how did you, I don't know if you're you want to talk about it, but how did you handle the equity versus cash with your contractors? And when you were raising equity from angel investors and VCs, how did you kind of handle their concerns about a non-technical founder with outsourced development?
Yeah.
And this is kind of complicated, but did any of them have any stipulations in terms of venture debt or anything like that?
Did any of the investors have a stipulation?
Yeah.
Rega-
Like, you're not allowed to take it if you take our money, or how did they feel about venture debt on top of their own money?
Okay. So that wasn't as much of an issue. I really like plain vanilla documents. I mean, there's a lot of lawyers out there. There's a lot of smart ones. I am not the only company that's raised a seed round this year. Why, of all the things we could do, I don't want to reinvent the wheel on what a term sheet looks like. There's NEVCA has a really good term sheet. There's a few others. There's like 3 things that you should ever argue for in a term sheet. And it's like what the valuation is, what the pre, what the post, what the rights of each of those, what the stock class is and what the, what the option pool is. There's not that many things that actually matter. There's a bunch of like really tiny, minute details. And I guess if there's board seats. So kind of board seats, option pool, valuation, and class of stock. I wouldn't try to pioneer anything very different. I had one investor that was like, oh, can we have, so if these are your revenue projections, can we have something that if your revenue projections are like 20% down, we get 20% more stock? And I'm like, yeah, great. Here's something that if our revenue projections are 20% up, you get 20% less stock. He's like, well, that seems kind of atypical. I'm like, yeah, all right, let's, and to a certain point, like I've got some really smart investors. They're incredibly valuable to us. They can ask for anything that they want. It doesn't mean that everything they ask for is reasonable. You can say, listen, there's a really standard doc, and if you want something weird, that kind of gives them permission to also want something weird to offset it. So say, listen, this is a really standard document. We've got lawyers. I'm not smart enough to know legal document. Let's just do this. But there's no real good reasons to do something really crazy. And smart investors will know that. It's like we could spend $20,000 paying the lawyer to come up with some weird scenario that's never going to happen, or we could sign the same document that 80% of everybody signs and just be okay with it. And understand what are your levers, what makes sense to you, what's important to you. For the technical, we had folks that I did that sort of prorated, where initially I had a lot of people that were just straight contractors. Some of them that I had hopes and dreams would come over. I had one guy that I'd bought a laptop for, and he showed up, and he's like, oh, actually, no, I'm not ready. It was like total like my like Winnie Cooper Wonder Years technical founder dating moment, where it was like cue the sad music and big eyes and so I've definitely had some of those where I didn't set the expectation. I didn't understand sort of what we were progressing towards. After that, I had some really good developers, and we had some of them were contractors where I said, here's going to be that split between I want your discounted rate, but you're going to get equity. And then I've had other folks that I've eventually hired to say, we're going to have, I really like working with you. I think you'll be a good part of the team. Why don't we contract for 2 months and then you come on perm? But this is 2 months. This is 8 weeks. Not like, hey, let's contract for a little bit. There's a lot of these, especially once you have a little bit more money, there's a lot of people that just want to be contractors, and they're like, well, let's see where it goes, because they know that you don't want to hire a contractor, but they want 6 months of contract work. So setting that expectation and moving towards it. There really wasn't any stipulation from my investors. Again, like if you've got, the main story, that once, and I had started to build the team around me, once I could say like, yeah, we've talked to people, Dan's not, he should be okay building a team. There's other people that seem to like him. He's got a team, he's got good people. And that milestone thing as well to say, I've got a great guy, he's going to be my CTO. I have him 10 hours a week right now. One of his milestones is as soon as your money's in, he's on full time. It's a perfectly acceptable thing to do. Just be honest and upfront about it with your investors and make sure you have that agreement with that person. The venture debt thing didn't come up, but yeah, I'm trying to, we'll talk later about how that works. But as long as that's part of the deal, your deal is whatever you can get the most amount of people to agree to that they find reasonable. So if you've got one person that's going to do your whole round and they don't like venture debt, it's not going to happen. If you get 9 people or 10 people and one person doesn't want it, you either leave that person out, but usually there's sort of that social norm. We say, listen, everybody else is okay with this. This is something that we're going to do. This is the nature of the round. Be very honest with your investors about everything. especially once their money's in, and let them know, like, here's the expectation, here's a relationship coming in.
Just to follow up on the contractors, how and where did you find your contractors, and how did you know that they were good?
Yeah. So start going to startups things a lot. I mean, there is a really strong startup community in Boston. They're very welcoming. They're not very cliquey. With everybody that I hire, from a kind of a vendor perspective, I want us to know a ton of people in common. As much as you could look at LinkedIn recommendations and whatever else, what I love about the startup scene in Boston is it's incredibly welcoming. It's incredibly friendly. It's also a village. Like, nobody's going to screw you over. If we know all of the same people, that it's a small pool and nobody wants to pee in it. So find somebody that's in the same pool as you. Don't find somebody that doesn't have any relation to the rest of the community. But yeah, points in common, and then ask, right? And say, well, what do you think about working with, Mark? And I'm like, okay, then, oh, he's great, he's awesome, I love him. He's, well, why aren't you working with him then? Oh, so you got to dig a little bit there too. And you might say, like, oh, he's a great guy. He does PHP. We're all Rails. There's a lot of good reasons for it, but don't. And then, not just say, like, well, do you like him? But, like, how well do you know him? Have you worked with him? Who do you know has worked with him? What's the nature of it? So dig a little bit. It doesn't take a lot, but if you've got people that you trust and they're in that community, you can get a good sense of somebody, and then they have that obligation to you, and you have that obligation to them. I mean, Boston, I think a lot of things are, but Boston's the kind of town where you live and die on your reputation. If you kind of shake somebody's hand and tell them something, like, that's got to be the truth. They've got to know that you mean it, and they've got to know that they can trust you. My reputation's very important to me, and I like to work with people where that's the same with them, and that we have those common obligations.
Hi, thank you so much. In terms of a name, I've been toying around with names, and then, like, in a rash of, like, excitement, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna buy this domain. And then, like, I started using it, and everyone's like, really? And then, like, what about this? What about this? So, but because I already bought it, like, what's your, and I noticed, I just Googled Crowdly. It used to be something else. Like, so how did that transition work? Like, what's your advice on that?
So, I mean, I had Crowdly stuck in my head for like 12 months, and I eventually bought it. But I bought it cheap. I bought it like $1,200. If you're a bootstrap startup, you can play the poverty card a whole ton, right? Somebody's like, oh, that should be worth $20,000. It's like, I'll give you $300 for it. That's where you are kind of bootstrap. You can negotiate there. I'd say with a name, the thing to be careful about, if you say that I want to do, bridalshowerflowers.com, and it's like, oh, actually, wait a minute, maybe you want to sell those to weddings too, maybe you want to sell them at funerals, right? So a lot of times people have a name that really paints them into a corner. Appswell, we were Appswell at the previous thing, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to make apps anymore. It's like, well, that doesn't work. That's a whole lot of years in that. But I think people go even more specific as well. I'd say have a name that's sort of evocative, that is means something to you, but it doesn't have to have like your entire what your company does in the title, and give yourself some flexibility in that as well.
I actually meant, like, it's quite broad. Sorry, I actually meant, like, right now it is quite broad, and we did it on purpose because we didn't want to pigeonhole ourselves. Mm-hmm. But the response is like, oh, it's a bit clunky. Like, they say it's quite long. So they're like, you should think of like a shorter one. But for now, is it okay? I guess I'm asking, like, is it okay to just keep using it until we decide on something better?
Yeah, definitely. You're not trading on your brand value. You're not Coke, you're not Pepsi. It's not like everybody's going to recognize you in the supermarket. So I'd say until you're really kind of building brand and building volume, I mean, don't have an awful name, but you're not at the point where you're married to something that you can't move.
Yeah, I think just one more.
Hi, from the time you go from a startup or finding your first co-founder till being well-funded or having a great set of advisors, what are the top few traps that you need to be cautious about in terms of lawyers or people or services, tools, or getting the best product out at the outset?
Yeah, definitely. So it's a great question. I think some of it is that you've got a lot of people that have good advice, You don't have to listen to all of it. You should never listen to all of it. I had some good advisors that came from very specific backgrounds. They're like, you need to stop everything you're doing and build a patent portfolio right now. And they were like, switch and router guys from, the 128, 30 years ago, and that was the whole business. Everybody sees things from their perspective. So know that you've got good advisors, know that they're looking out of their own windows, and being able to temper that. I think as far as the people that you start to do, your company is going to change faster than you think it's going to. For the people that are involved in it, especially the people that are starting to get involved in it, the vast majority of them will not be involved in the same capacity as you anticipate. Vest everything, never do anything that's not vested. Your stock is not infinite. You can kind of give it away like it's candy, and eventually you will be out of it. I think, but yeah, kind of temper the advice that you get. And there's also, there's very little that you actually have to spend money on. Try to reduce every single thing that you do to the absolute core basics. There's some companies that kind of prey off of earlier stage companies if you have a little bit of money on how they can get the money out of you, or if you buy services that are kind of beyond the scope of what you need. I need a $20,000 a month PR company for my landing page, probably not. So make sure you're not overspending at the wrong things.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.